All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the 8:30 session of the Sperry Symposium. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Mark Ogletree. Mark D. Ogletree was raised in Texas and joined the church at age 18. He served an LDS mission from 1982 to 1984 in Seattle, Washington. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1987 from Brigham Young University, a Master of Arts in Educational Psychology from Northern Arizona University in 1990, and a Master of Arts in Mental Health Counseling in 1994 from Northern Arizona University, and a PhD in Family and Human Development from Utah State University in May of 2000. Mark has taught at Brigham Young University in the Church History and Doctrine department since 2010. He has published several books and articles on marriage and family relationships. He is presently the bishop of his ward in Provo, Utah, and he is married to the former Janie Cook, and they have 8 children and 14 grandchildren. So please join me in welcoming Mark Ogletree.
Thank you, Nick. And everyone, thank you for being here. I really imagined that there'd be 7 people here. And so we have some ward members and some old friends from Texas and some family and then a whole bunch of other people. But watch this. This will be the fun part. All my students, raise your hand. Way to go, guys. Okay. I thought there was just Lee. Okay, so Lee, I'm so glad that you're here. Guys, this is going to be hard to follow Tad Callister and Brad Wilcox. So I really feel like the mule at the Kentucky Derby. So thank you for being here with me to let me enjoy this. And all those important people are gone now, so we can have some fun. All right? I hope you're okay with that. So I wanted to share with you an experience as we talk about fatherhood a little bit and how it kind of works or can work sometimes. But a few years ago, I was riding with a colleague in the car, and we were traveling from Dallas to San Antonio for some meetings. And at the time, I think our oldest 2 children were in the mission field, and we were pretty well established. I think we had some kids in high school, a couple in middle school, a couple in elementary, and the guy that I was riding with in the car, his oldest kid was like 6 or 7 years old. And some of you have had this happen, I'm sure, but he said, it looks like to me that you guys have a pretty awesome family. And if anyone's ever said that to you, you know what you're thinking, right? And you're thinking, you don't live with us, right? You haven't been home. But he said that. He said, I admire some of the things that you're doing. He said, could you share with me some things that you've done in your family that maybe I can incorporate into my family? And once again, I felt really dumb about that. But I thought, you know what? He asked, so maybe I'll tell him a couple things. And as I was about to tell him, the phone rang, and it was my wife. And she started to tell me that our daughter, Cassidy, who was in 5th grade at the time, ran away from home. Cassie, raise your hand. Do you remember this story? Okay. And my wife does not panic. She never worries about anything, but she was a little panicky. She looked everywhere, and she couldn't find her. So we were having this conversation in the car on the phone with this guy sitting next to me about where's our daughter. And finally, my wife called back a few minutes later and said, actually, I found her. She's on the side of the house. She was basically just skipping school today and was just going to have this picnic on the side of our house and just hope that we thought that she ran away. I think, Cass, I don't know. You may have to correct me on that. But I remember how embarrassing that phone call was. Here was a guy just 10 minutes earlier asking for parenting advice, and I could tell at this point he was like, never mind, right? Just forget it. So not long after that, I came to Education Week, just right here at BYU. And the class I was teaching was on parenting. And I thought it was going okay. And then I called home one night, and I asked my wife how it was going. We lived in Texas. I was up here. She said, not good. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, your son, that's how it always works, right, when they're in trouble. Your son and his teacher's quorum buddies found a bale of hay in the middle of the road. And they decided to pick it up. Right, guys? You're thinking free bale of hay. And take it to one of the neighbors' homes and throw it in their pool, which is like one of the worst things that you can do, right? With a bale of hay in a pool. And she's telling me this, and I said, how did you find out? And one of the young men had bragged about it to the wrong person. It got back to a couple of mothers, and they handled it. But the next day, the topic was keys to successful parenting. And I felt like the biggest hypocrite, right, to stand up in front of everyone and talk about some of those principles. I think a week or two later, our son and his teacher's quorum pulled all the for sale signs up in the neighborhood and then put them in other yards where the houses weren't for sale. And I think a few weeks after that, and you'll love this, they walked into the kitchen of the church and they opened all the drawers and they licked every utensil and they put it back, okay? Anyway, so that's what we were dealing with in our life at that time, right? And maybe some of you deal with those things too, and I share that with you because I think the best parenting advice we ever got in our life received was from a member of our ward in Mesa, Arizona, who said, I don't take credit for the good things my kids do, so I'm not taking credit for the bad things that they do, right? Some of you know James Dobson, the great Christian psychologist. He talked about a family kind of like this, an outstanding family. They had 3 children at the time that all made straight A's, kept their rooms perpetually clean, were musically talented, ate with one hand in their laps, first-team athletes, spoke politely and correctly to adults, and even had teeth that didn't need to be straightened. And then here's James Dobson. He said it was almost disgusting how well they turned out. Predictably, our friends awarded themselves complete credit for the successes of their children. They are also inclined at the drop of a hat to tell everyone how to raise their kids. Overconfidence oozed from their fingertips, but then something interesting happened. At the age of 40, that mother got pregnant. It was a surprise. And that baby, as it grew up, was the terror of the neighborhood. They called it the little caboose. Tough as nails and twice as sharp. Loving to fight with his parents, knows more than they do. The funny thing about this is the parents quit giving parenting advice shortly after his birth. And then he said this, when I think of those parents, I'm reminded of a photograph in my files of an elegantly dressed woman who is holding a cup of coffee. Her finger is cocked ever so daintily to the side, and her face reveals utter self-assurance. But unfortunately, she doesn't know that her slip has collapsed around her feet. The caption reads, confidence is what you have before you understand the situation. And I can say that confidence is what we have before we have children, right? So here we go. I want to talk about Alma tonight as an intentional father. Elder Hales shared this with us in conference quite a few years ago as he talked about Satan making an all-out assault on the family today. He seeks to destroy the sanctity of the family. He demeans the important roles of mothers and fathers. He encourages moral uncleanliness and violations of the law of chastity. He discourages parents from placing the bearing and rearing of children as one of their highest priorities. One of his targets today, as many of you know, is fathers. And this is from Elder Perry. One of his prime targets is fathers. He seeks to make fathers irrelevant by diminishing their role in the family, he said. Now, one of the things I want you to consider as you kind of look at some of the things here, that let's talk about busyness and how busyness erodes family life just for a minute. The average work week today for the American worker is 49 to 50 hours a week. Working men and women today spend more than 14 hours a week at work compared to the other American workers 30 years ago. 14 more hours a week than we were working 30 years ago, The average manager or just professional will work more than 50 hours this week. So not only is it work, there are other things pulling at us. Now throw in there for members of the church, the demands that the church places on us with our callings and responsibilities, the demands that we have with a family, usually larger than most, and there's a lot of things tugging and pulling at us. Some fathers in our country have removed themselves from their families. Others, they've been marginalized by our culture and by our society. There's even a movement called solo motherhood, which means we don't need men at all in our lives. We can become pregnant in different ways and raise children as single mothers without anyone around. So David Popenoe, years ago, a great book, Life Without Father. I know a few other bodies of evidence whose weight leans so much in one direction as this, that overall, the strongest, the best situation for children is to have two parents, a mother and a father. There is great strength that comes from having a mother and a father working in tandem. We understand, though, back to dads just for a minute, how important fathers are, how vital they are to the family, how crucial they are in the development of their children. Fathers are the primary example of manhood for their sons. And I thought of this just this week as I met with a young man who's been home from a mission for a while. He's having some doubts about the church, as some of you have experienced with people in your own families. And he told me that he wasn't sure how prayer even worked. Now, this is a returned missionary. But he said, I can honestly say I've never received an answer to a prayer. He said, I don't even know how to give priesthood blessings. I do, but I feel like I'm just making stuff up as I lay my hands upon the heads of my siblings. His mother recently asked him to bless his siblings before the school year started. He said, I don't understand anything about the temple. It's just weird to me. Now, here's a little bit about this young man. He's been raised by a single mother his whole life. His father has been absent from his life, and as he shared those things with me recently, I just thought how different his life would be had he had a father in his life, a returned missionary, someone who loved the gospel, someone who loved being a dad, someone who was involved. Those questions would have been answered a long time ago. Elder Christofferson, we believe in the ideal of the man who puts his family first. We believe that fathers are unique and irreplaceable, he said. What about Elder Christofferson's own father? I was blessed with an exemplary father, he said. I recall that when I was a boy of 12, my father became a candidate for our city council in our rather small community. Some of you know that was Linden, Utah. He did not mount an extensive election campaign, but I remember that Dad had my brothers and I distribute copies of a flyer door to door urging people to vote for Paul Christofferson. There were a number of adults I handed the flyer to who remarked that Paul was a good and honest man and they would have no problem voting for him. My young boy heart swelled with pride in my father. It gave me confidence and a desire to follow in his footsteps. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was upright and a good man and an inspiration and an example for a son, he said. Brothers and sisters, I've spent a good deal of my life studying our apostles and prophets. I've never seen anything. I've never read anything. I've never come across anything that didn't tell me that these were all such good men, such decent men, men who are upright and inspirational, good fathers, good husbands, long before the church ever knew who they were. And those prophets exist in our scriptures as well. And of course, we're going to talk about Alma tonight a little bit. I thought you might find this interesting when asking men where they learned how to be fathers, or where do they receive their most strength in fatherhood. 89% of men said, I learned how to be a good father from my wife. All right? And then another 72% said, I learned how to be a good father from other men or from other fathers. 72%, I learned from my mom. Not many learn from their dads. That's about 61%. Now, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for this data because that's exactly how it pans out, at least on the first two for me. I've learned everything I know about being a father from my own wife, and then whatever else I've needed to learn, I've learned it from the men around me in my ward and stake, and I'm grateful for that. We do believe that fathers matter, but good fathers are becoming endangered. Even in the church, we've had so many messages from our leaders worried about dads and their involvement with their families. Definitely a scarcity of fathering models in our society, in our culture. Can you think of one really good dad even on TV? Can anyone? Way to go, Charles Ingalls. Was he still out there? They're still showing those reruns? I think that's awesome, okay? Most fathers on television are portrayed as, this is the phrase of one researcher, as doofus dads, right? That just can't get anything right. So much of that going on today. Listen to what President Kimball says. We all need heroes to honor and admire. We need people that we can pattern our lives for. Christ is our chief model. He's the chief example. He is our pattern. He is our guide. He is our prototype and our friend. But in a lesser degree, the apostles and prophets today who have lived as Christ lived also become examples for us. They are examples for us, and I testify to you that that's true. I know that it's true. I've seen it and I've watched it. Men in the Scriptures can also be examples for fathers. Women in the Scriptures can be examples for mothers. Throughout the whole Book of Mormon, the words of wise fathers often penetrated the hearts of humble sons. And Alma was one of those fathers who taught his children the truths of the gospel. Now, Elder Holland shares a pattern with us that I want you to pay attention to, but he says at a vulnerable moment in Nephi's life, it was when his prophetic future was at stake. It was the words of his father that changed his life. By the way, not a young men's leader, not even a bishop or a seminary teacher. It was Lehi, right? Same with Enos. At a turning point in his life, it was the words that he often heard his father speak that set him on course to receive one of the great revelations of the Book of Mormon. For Alma, it was remembering the words that he heard his father prophesy. Once again, not anyone from the stake presidency, not a Sunday school teacher, but the words of his father. That brief memory, that personal testimony offered by his father at the time when the father may have felt nothing was sinking in, not only saved the spiritual life of his son, but changed forever the history of our Book of Mormon people. So there's that pattern. Here's the next idea to introduce tonight, and that is the idea of becoming intentional, becoming purposeful, becoming deliberate in what we do. You can't, President Newdorf said, just float down the waters of life and trust that the current is going to take you where you want to be one day. It doesn't work like that. Long before that was said by President Newdorf, Bill Dotery, one of the great family scholars in our country, said this: "Sometimes with my therapy clients, I use an analogy of the Mississippi River, which flows a couple of miles from my office in Minneapolis. I say that family life is like putting a canoe in that great body of water. If you enter the water in St. Paul and don't do anything, you'll end up in New Orleans," he said. "If you want to go north or even stay at St. Paul, you're going to have to work hard and paddle hard," right? In the same way, if you get married, have a child without working a plan for our family's journey, we will likely head south towards less closeness, less meaning, and less joy in our lives over time, he said. "Family, like a canoe, must be steered or paddled, or it won't take you where you want to go." We call this being intentional. We are here to act and to not be acted upon. We hear that phrase so often in the Scriptures and from even Elder Bednar recently, who said it so many times. Intentional fathers are proactive. They have a plan. They have a blueprint along with their spouses to help their children grow in every way: intellectually, socially, mentally, physically, spiritually. They don't let society dictate how it's going to turn out in their family, how things are going to go. They are purposeful, deliberate, and organized. I believe this, brothers and sisters, that Alma the Younger was very intentional when it came to how he parented. He was not going to leave how his sons turned out to chance. He was going to take the bull by the horns. He wanted to prepare his sons for a life of discipleship and citizenship, and he did so by teaching the doctrinal truths that he taught them. By sharing those messages, he equipped them to deal with life in a spiritual way, in a temporal way, in every way. So let's talk about Alma here just for a minute. Some of you know that, like Brigham Young, who was the president of the Utah Territory and the president of the church at the same time, Alma kind of had a similar situation, right? He's the chief judge, he's the high priest, he's in charge, he's righteous, he's keeping the commandments, he's a servant leader. But the Nephites turn their hearts away from God because of pride and contention. Church members become more unrighteous. What does Alma do? He lets go of that judgment seat so he can devote all of his time to the spiritual welfare of his people. And he teaches them. But do they accept it? Are they okay with it? They're offended because of the strictness of the word, and they start to reject a prophet in Alma. What does he do? One of my father-in-law's favorite phrases: he circles the wagons. He focuses on his own family. He's going to focus on his sons. He is going to give them specific charges. In fact, it says that he would gather his sons together to give everyone a charge separately. He was going to teach them individually. I love that he was going to do it that way. He understood that his children had different temperaments, that they had different personalities, that they had different missions in life and were going different places. So this was not going to be a one-size-fits-all sermon for his sons. So I thought I'd kind of just bring this to life a little bit, and I know that everyone in here who is a parent can relate to this completely, but I couldn't help but think of how if we, my wife and I, were to give a sermon to our children in our last days, how different it would be for every one of them. And I thought about that as they were growing up, and I was just remembering that in our family there were some kids in our family that were super social, just like in your family. And I remember that if we sent them to their room, that was torture to them. But I remember we had another couple other kids that if we sent them to their room, that would be a picnic, right? I mean, they thought that would be the greatest thing in the world. We have children that like to argue. We have children that never argue. But we have some that made a living out of arguing. I love this quote, "Arguing with a kid is like wrestling with a pig. They both get dirty, but the pig loves it." We had some little piglets at our house, right? We have children that are kind and tender-hearted. We give you the shirt off their back. Others would walk over the top of you if you were passed out on the floor, right? Just kind of scoot you out of the way. A couple that are never wrong. In fact, if they hit you in the head with a hammer, they could convince you that it was your fault, right? Others that if you looked at them in a certain way, they would just start to cry. One daughter, this is my favorite, she would just crack so easily. The minute you said, and I can say it because she's not here, but the minute you said, "Bethany, we need to talk," she just confessed everything. It just came all out right there. And then if you would rub her back, she would tell you everything about everybody. She just would spill it about everyone. We learn, just like many of you, that the way that we treat our children is very different, and that continues in their adult years. Now, here's B.H. Roberts talking about Alma and his sons. In each case, Alma was dealing with a son somewhat different in temperament and somewhat different in their life's work, he says. The need to provide customized counsel and direction, brothers and sisters, is a principle that many of our church leaders are aware about. Psychologists are aware about it. Here's President Faust, that child rearing is so individualistic. Every child is different and unique. What works for one may not work for another. Haim Ginott, the great Jewish psychologist, that children need to be loved uniquely, not uniformly. Can I quote Lavelle Edwards? I've always wanted to. Nick, is it okay? Because I know you and I have a thing about this, okay? No two players are going to have the same needs. It's not going to work if you treat them the same. If you're going to treat people fairly and equally, you have to treat them differently. Boy, I watch a lot of parents that struggle trying to treat all their children the same. Even with your own children, Lavelle said, you realize that. You need to treat them differently in their own areas. You can't motivate them in exactly the same way. You can't discipline exactly the same, and children need to be raised as individuals, not as a group. And then he goes on to say, and that's kind of how we do it on the football team as well. I think it worked really good for Lavelle, don't you? All right. So let's get into the heart of this right now. Are you ready? We're just right there. This breakout of how many verses are in these sermons. So we have 3 sermons here we're looking at, right? We're looking at Alma 36 and 37, Alma's counsel to Helaman. We're looking at Alma 38, Alma's counsel to Shiblon. And then Alma 39 to 42, his counsel to Corianton. There's no balance here at all, right? Alma is giving tailored counsel to each one of his sons, right? 50% to Corianton, 42% to Helaman, and only 8% to Shiblon. Now let's get statistical. You ready for this? All right. Carrie, is it okay if we do that in this big room? All right. So we're going to use a little word cruncher analysis, everyone, and we're going to take 4-word phrases. All right? This is one way that we can study this. We're going to take these 4-word phrases, and we are going to compare them to every chapter. We're going to see what we get, okay? We're using word cruncher here, okay? And if we're just looking at words, we don't really need this. I was going to say something about it, but we're fine. So let's just go right to the point, okay? We're going to compare Alma 36 and 37 with first Alma 38. There are only 4% of the phrases, when we compare those 2 sermons together, are kind of similar. They share some similar phrases. But 96% are completely unique, all right? Let's compare the sermon to Helaman with the sermon to Corianton. Only about 3.5% of the phrases in there are similar. What does that mean? It means that 96% are completely different and unique. All right, let's go to Alma 38. This is where we have the most crossover, okay? When we look at Alma 38 compared to the counsel that Alma gave to Helaman, 14% of it is similar. That sounds like a lot, right? But that means 85% isn't. Still, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of uniqueness, 85%, all right? Comparing Alma's sermon, Alma 38, to the counsel to Corianton, nothing even close here. Only 6% is similar in those sermons, but 94% is unique. All right? So, and by the way, some of you are like, well, why do we have to compare it twice or whatever? It's because of the number of verses and about 9 other statistical things that I don't even understand, all right? We're just going to trust the crew on this one, all right? So comparing Alma 39 to 42, his sermon to Corianton, only 3% when compared with the sermon to Helaman. Only 3% is similar. Once again, about 96, 97% completely unique and different. Comparing Corianton to the sermon with Shibalon, there you go again, only 1% is similar. About 99% is new stuff, unique stuff. So when we talk about Alma giving tailor-made sermons to his children, we're not messing around. I mean, it is right there, right? So it was a custom with the old patriarchs, as you probably know, to lay their hands on their children's head, to bless them in some way, to prophesy, to warn, to give admonitions, to give counsel, to give promises. This was a Hebraic kind of cultural tradition that happened in the Old Testament. It even happens in the Book of Mormon with Lehi. It's going to happen right here with Alma. It's not too strange that Alma would do something like that. But I want to read this to you. Alma's instruction to his sons, as recorded in chapters 36 to 42, qualify as the single most important event of his ministry, comprising 20% of the total account of what was talked about, the 20% of the account. This material is the largest passage of fatherly counsel to any father in the Book of Mormon, and my thought is probably from any father in all the scriptures, is what I would think. No recorded father in the Book of Mormon gave more precise, direct, deep, and relevant counsel. This counsel is also timeless. It is for us today. You know that President Benson said it, Mormon talked about it, that the Book of Mormon is for our day. I can't think of anything that Alma shares with his sons that is not relevant for us. All right, so you ready? Let's see. Do we have time to do this? We do. All right. Number 1, Alma testifies of the truthfulness of the gospel to his sons repeatedly, right? In the Book of Mormon, faithful fathers constantly bore their testimony to their sons. A couple examples there, but I'll go right here. Most of this comes from Alma 36, and you can look at the words that we're seeing here, the phrases that Alma's using. I know of myself. I have seen eye to eye. I do know. It's all there. He's testifying. What does Elder Bednar remind us of? That we need to do that in our homes more often than we do. That parents need to testify to their children, that children need to testify to their parents. We should do it often. This reminds me of an experience I had a long time ago as a BYU student. I was visiting with one of my mission companions. His father was in town. His father had come up from Mesa, Arizona. And I remember messing around with his dad. We had a good relationship. And I said, why are you up here anyway? Just for the BYU football game, probably. And he said, no. I actually came to bear my testimony to my sons. He had 4 sons at BYU at the time, and he wanted to come up here and share his testimony with him. Now, brothers and sisters, do you have your scriptures with you or access to scriptures? I'm going to go to Alma chapter 40. This is another way of teaching by the Spirit here. I'm looking at verse 1 in Alma chapter 40. He's talking to Corianton. And now, my son, here is somewhat more I would say unto thee, for I perceive that thy mind is worried. Turn the page. Alma 41, verse 1, speaking to Corianton again. And I perceive that thy mind has been worried also concerning this thing. Alma 42, verse 1, Corianton again. I perceive that there is somewhat more which doth worry your mind, which you cannot understand. Alma is teaching by the Spirit. He is being led by the Spirit, and he's being directed. He is testifying of the truths of the gospel. All right. Next, I love this. Alma connect. By the way, we need to do that, right? We need to do a better job of that, of testifying of the truths of the gospel. Come follow me makes that a lot easier than it used to be, right? Number 2, Alma connected his sons with their ancestry. How well do your children and grandchildren know of the incredible stories in your family history? How well do they know the stories of faith and devotion, of courage, of fearlessness? Alma connected his sons to their ancestry. He talked about the deliverance of their fathers. He passed down instruction from their progenitors regarding the safeguarding of the plates. He testified of how the sacred records blessed their forebears. He uses the word fathers 14 times in Alma 36 and 37 alone. What does it mean? Ancestors, right? He's connecting them to their ancestry. Now, a few years ago, our general authorities were in a training meeting. Maybe Elder Callister could share this with us if he was still here in this room with us, but we'll just tell his story anyway. But the question was asked is, how do we help those youth struggling with pornography today? What did President Nelson say? Teach them of their identity and their purpose. Connect them to who they are, their spiritual and their biological ancestry, right? Elder Scott, do you young people want a sure way to eliminate the influence of the adversary in your lives? Immerse yourself in searching for your ancestors. We can do that. We can do that in many different ways. Number 3, Alma sets a righteous example for his sons. He even tells them, I'm setting a righteous example for you. So here we go. Do as I have done, he says. Learn of me. Retain a remembrance as I have done. You see those different examples of that. We understand this. We understand the power of example. A good friend of mine shared this. Teenagers can smell a hypocrite a mile away, especially if it's their own parents, right? So Brigham Young teaches parents to never do anything that they would not be willing to see their own children do, to set an example for them that they wish to imitate. We can be examples for our children today. Number 4, Alma gave his sons specific counsel on how to carry out their duties. He taught them how to carry out their duties, right? Whatever their duties were, if they be temporal or spiritual, he taught that. He helped them understand the importance of work, of fulfilling their responsibilities in the church. He gave counsel to Helaman directly on how to care for the records, to Shiblon on how to be a missionary, to Corianton on how to repent. He was giving counsel all the time. He was teaching all the time. We are, as parents, to be the prime teachers of the gospel to our children. I hope that they hear it first from us. I've always wanted that with our own children. I wanted them to hear it from us first. Now, here's Elder Theodore A. Tuttle. Parents, how would you pass this test if your family was isolated from the church and you had to supply all the religious training? Have you become so dependent on others that you do little or nothing at home? Tell me how much of the gospel your children would know if all they knew is what they were taught at their home by you. Ponder that, he said, I repeat. How much of the gospel would your children know if all they knew is what had been taught by you? Brother Callister reminds us that as parents, we are the prime teachers of the gospel in the home. And when all is said and done, the home is the ideal forum for the teaching of the gospel. Now, do our children receive our best? Some of you prepare lessons for classes that you'll teach this Sunday. I'm going to teach a class on Sunday to a group of young men. I will spend 2 hours preparing that lesson. I can't think of the last time I ever spent 2 hours preparing a lesson in my home, right? When I was on the High Council, I would spend 4 to 5 hours on a Saturday preparing a talk for the next day. I've never prepared anything for my kids that took 4 or 5 hours, and I think that's what Brother Callister is saying. I don't know if the titles of bishop or Relief Society president will survive, but we will be husbands and fathers, wives and mothers in the next life. We will continue to teach our children the gospel, and so let's follow Alma's example and do it. Number 5, Alma called his sons to repentance. I love that. Don't you? Don't you love that Alma was a courageous parent? He wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid to be a parent. He could have actually said something like this that Dr. John Rosemond said a long time later. Give your children a daily dose of vitamin N. This vital nutrient consists simply of the most character-building 2-letter word in the English language, no. Unfortunately, many, if not most, of today's children suffer from vitamin N deficiency. They've been overindulged by well-meaning parents who've given them far too much of what they want and far too little of what they need. I love that Alma was not afraid to be a parent. He was not. Too many, by the way, you know this, right? But too many parents today are afraid of their children. And we should fear God more than our children, that's for sure. But so many don't. And so here's Alma giving correction, giving direction to his children. To Helaman, how strict are the commandments of God? Make sure that you keep them, he says. And if you transgress those commandments, there are consequences for transgressing. Warning Shiblon about the temptation of pride and boasting, and counsels him to bridle his passions. He wasn't afraid to say that to his son. Maybe he was most direct and bold with Corianton, who had committed sexual transgression as a missionary, explaining the consequences that would be sure to follow Corianton if he stayed on the same course. You cannot hide your crimes from God, and if you don't repent, they will stand as a testimony against you at the last day. Now, that is a parent that is not afraid of his kids, right? Elder Maxwell, I have no hesitancy, brothers and sisters, in stating that unless checked, permissiveness, by the end of its journey, will cause humanity to stare in mute disbelief of its awful consequences. That's the greatest parenting statement I've ever read. It's the greatest political statement I've ever read. It's the greatest cultural statement I've ever read. I love what Elder Maxwell says about permissiveness. This reminds me of something that you may be a little familiar with, maybe not, but it's Hophni and Phinehas in the Old Testament, children of Eli. Some of you may remember that Eli was the high priest over the portable tabernacle at Shiloh. He was 98 years old, and maybe that's kind of why he was checked out as a parent. But his sons Hophni and Phinehas were also priests at the tabernacle. They knew not the Lord, and it makes you wonder why. They were called sons of Belial, which means wickedness or worthlessness. They were hijacking sacrifices. So when people would come to offer sacrifice at the tabernacle, they were taking those sacrifices and eating the best parts of the meat. If you didn't hand over the best parts of the meat to them, they would force you to give it to them. They were guilty of sexual immorality on the tabernacle, the grounds of the tabernacle, having sexual relationships with women who assembled there. The Lord was obviously displeased with them, and here's Eli, the permissive parent of the year, who says to his sons, so why are you guys doing this? That's my paraphrase. And you're making the Lord's people transgress, and I'm just not hearing a good report about you guys. This is just not good. The brothers did not care. It says they hearkened not unto the voice of their father. Or in other words, guys, don't do that. Just cut it out. That was his parenting style. They didn't cut it out. A man of God came to Eli and told him straight up that his sons made a mockery of the sacrifices in the temple, and that you honor your sons above the Lord, and you make yourself fat with the offerings of Israel. Eli's sons made themselves vile, and Eli restrained them not. This is permissive parenting at its finest. Now, I'll save that for later and let you do your homework and look in 1 Samuel chapter 2, 3, and 4, and you can see what happened as a result of Eli's permissive parenthood, but it's terrible. Alma understood the consequences of unchecked permissiveness. He was going to stand up to his children and teach them the truth. That's what intentional fathers do. That's what he did. All right, next, number 6. I love this. I don't know how cultural this would have been to praise children in this ancient world that they lived in, but Alma did. He understood the need for relationships with his children, building up their strengths and giving them compliments. Examples? I have great joy in you, he tells Shiblon, in your steadiness and in your faithfulness. I also hope you will continue in keeping the commandments. I have great joy in thee already, he says. Alma was able to give those kind of compliments and praise to his sons when they needed it, and I'm sure a lot of it wasn't ever recorded. Before a child can ever be influenced by their parents, there must be a demonstration of love and respect. Or in other words, we have to have a relationship with our children before we can teach them anything. We can't teach anyone anything, especially our children or grandchildren, if there's no relationship there. If there's no relationship, then there's absolutely no teaching, there's no influence. There's really nothing good that can happen if the relationship isn't there and intact. Rules without relationship equals rebellion. Alma understood it, and he connected with his sons. Who knows what he did with them to spend time, but at least we know he gave some compliments and praise. Here's President Benson. Praise your children more than you correct them. Praise them for even their smallest achievement, he said. I like that Alma did that. That's something all of us can do. Every one of us can praise our children and our grandchildren. Last one, brothers and sisters. We're doing so good on time. Was that a signal, Nick? Okay, that's perfect. Alma taught his sons true doctrine. And when I say true doctrine, I mean rich doctrine. I mean the heart and core of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean the creation, the fall, the atonement. All of it's there. Forgiveness, repentance, all of it. Prayer, pride, the plan of salvation, Alma 40 to 42. He understood that true doctrine changes attitudes and behavior quicker than the study of behavior changes behavior, and he probably understood that long before Elder Packer ever said it. Alma's counsel is timeless. And as we as contemporary parents are trying to raise our children and grandchildren in this toxic world, the things that he teaches are relevant to us today. The doctrinal truths that he preaches and teaches will help our children resist temptation and stay closer to the living Christ. His teachings to his sons provide modern parents with the tools and doctrines needed to navigate the obstacles and challenges of adolescence and young adulthood. As modern fathers immerse themselves in these teachings in Alma 36 to 42, they will be inspired. Parents can be inspired of how to teach, direct, and interact with their own children and grandchildren. We can learn to be intentional, purposeful, deliberate parents and be proactive in leading and teaching our families the gospel of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, I view Alma the same way I would view President Nelson or President Monson or Elder Maxwell or Elder Anderson or Elder Bednar. You go down the line. These were men that were wonderful, incredible husbands and fathers long before they were church leaders. These are good men and women that we should follow. And if we do so, the Spirit will guide us and direct us in raising our own families. I share that with you tonight. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.